Hi everyone, welcome to PVACCS's final event for the year, to Careers Night. It's been great to have you on board for the year along the journey with us. We hope you've gotten a lot out of it. Tonight we have a very exciting evening planned for you. We've got a bunch of speakers at multiple stages along their journeys in ICU and anaesthetics, and we hope that you get a lot out of them talking about their careers. I'd like to start first and foremost by acknowledging country, where PVACCS would like to recognise the traditional owners, past, present and emerging, and recognise that sovereignty was never ceded. This event can't happen without our sponsors, so a big thanks to Wavelength, Doctor on Call, Event and Amboss. I'll give each sponsor the opportunity to have a quick chat with you guys just about their products and maybe get you on board. So take it away when you get the chance. Have we got...
So I think unfortunately, like me to proceed forwards now. I'm Carol from Wavelength.
Sure.
Oh, here we go. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to come and attend your event this evening. As I said, my name is Carol. I'm the project and partnership lead here at Wavelength International, and I'm joined this evening by my colleagues Amy and Angela, who are both somewhere amongst the Zoom calls. They are our local and perm recruiters across anaesthetics and ICU. So thank you very much, as I say, for the invitation here. Just to give you a little bit of background on Wavelength, I'll just try and share my screen actually. So, oh, it's just saying disabled at the moment. Can I possibly share my screen? We've got some slides.
Sorry, give me one moment. Yep, you should be able to share screen now.
Okay. Oop. Continue. Okay, can everybody see my screen okay? Fantastic. Always good to check before we continue. So just give you a little bit of background on Wavelength International. So we're one of the larger medical recruitment organisations based here in Australia. We've been in operation for over 24 years, and we were initially started by Dr. John Bethel, who was a doctor himself, and Claire Ponsford, who was an HR manager, and they saw the requirement for medical recruitment. I got across Australia and established Wavelength. So we went from a couple of employees to now well over 80, so quite a big increase on that. So with this, we cover all different areas of medical recruitment. We can do locum, perm, and we also cover executive recruitment through our sister organisation, C-Centric. So depending on whatever level you're looking for assistance with, whether it's RMO, right through the different stages up to directors of medical services, we can certainly assist a little bit further. Now, all the specialties that we cover, basically everything across the hospital sector. We also cover divergent careers. So that's our area for those who are maybe interested in doing something clinical related, but possibly not directly seeing patients. So whether it's research, medical writing, or something just a little bit different, we also have a division that covers that. We also, as I mentioned before, cover executive, and that's through our sister organisation, C-Centric. Now, the opportunities we have, we basically cover all areas of Australia and New Zealand. We also have partnerships in the UK and Ireland as well. So if somebody's interested in either working nationally or internationally, we can certainly assist in both aspects. So as I mentioned, how can we assist? Locum roles, permanent roles. So whether you're looking for something a little bit different, whether you're looking for career progression, you're maybe in a role at the moment, but looking for something maybe in a different state, different hospital, not quite sure who can advise without trawling through the internet for hours and hours, certainly an agency can. And our recruitment consultants are specialised in their areas. So anaesthetics and ICU, we have dedicated consultants along with other areas. We can also assist with work and travel opportunities. If you want to take some time out, see Australia, earn some money, we can help with that. Career advice as well. And ideally an ongoing partnership. So a lot of doctors we've worked with for many, many years, from RMOs right up to consultant level. So we aim to partner with people for life or for a career really, rather than just a one-off placement that we help you with and then you continue in your travels. So you may see as we go through, I've got some QR codes that have come up here. If you're interested in speaking with one of our consultants, please do scan the code and fill in the form. It will come through to myself and I can direct you to the right person. Also gives you an opportunity to win $250, so always handy. So I just wanted to give you a quick overview of one doctor who we partnered with throughout her career. Now, I met this doctor early 2011, back when I started recruiting. She was PGY3, so just a couple of years graduated. Wasn't quite sure what to do. Wanted to see a little bit of Australia, but just wasn't quite sure what specialty she wanted to head in. Wasn't sure, you know, emergency, paediatrics. So we basically locumed together, essentially, for 24 months. She travelled around Australia, worked at a variety of different locations, rural and remote, and also some metro, and worked across the States and did a big lap of Australia, got her experience, and then realised that probably emergency was the area that she wanted to specialise in. So once she did that, she then managed to secure a permanent job at the first location we placed her at. She also found herself a husband and one of her colleagues at the location. She commenced the training programme, got married, and then continued to locum with us to save for a house deposit, and they bought their first house. Since then, she's managed to obtain specialist qualifications, done some private work, and has also continued working with us for some part-time telehealth work as well. So we've got a specialist division there because she's got a young family. So certainly, as I say, we aim to partner with doctors throughout their career and can help in many, many different avenues depending on what your requirements are. So if you'd like to contact us, these are our two recruiters. As I mentioned, Angie covers our permanent anaesthetics and ICU. Amy is specialising in the locum desk. So if that's an area you're looking for, please get in touch. But also we cover all different areas and specialties. So please scan the QR codes, pop into our draw. I'm more than happy to place you in touch with one of our consultants, and we'd love you to join, or we'd love to join you on your career journey moving forwards. So thank you very much, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your career night.
Thank you very much for that. We might take the opportunity to move on to the next sponsor. So has a representative from Amboss come? I think it was Kate.
I'm going to guess not, so let's just move on.
Yeah, no worries.
Rachel, do you want to reshare the slide? Yeah, thanks. Sorry,
Thank
took a while to sort everything out.
Okay. So once again, we've got a very exciting night for you ahead. We've got anaesthetics and ICU registrars and consultants to tell you all about not only their journey, but their day-to-day activities, and hopefully inspire you to get a bit more involved, give you some new ideas to bolster your CV and ask some questions. Questions obviously are a very important part of tonight. We ask that you submit your questions online via our Slido link, which we'll share with you at multiple points. And at the end, we'll go through and filter through some of the best questions. So compile your best questions and submit them as you can, and we'll try and fit them in. Okay, thank you.
Alrighty, and there's the Slido link, everyone. It's a great pleasure to introduce our first speaker of tonight. We're going to start with our intensive care speakers. So Dr. Simon Bayliss is one of the ED consultants and an ICU fellow at the Austin Health. He completed his training at Monash University, graduating in 2011, and then followed by ED training, and now he's doing his ICU training. So Simon, take it away, please.
No worries. Thank you very much. Probably not technically an ICU fellow in the sense that that's not the job I'm doing, but I have recently successfully passed the exam, so I'm getting there, certainly. I might just share some slides and have a bit of a quickly go through what I felt were the important things to talk about. And in terms of questions, I guess it sounds like there's a room for questions at the end, so I won't dwell on that. Sorry, doing that irritating thing where I can't find my slides properly. That's annoying. I'm really sorry.
if you are having difficulties, did you want to send them to me too? And I can...
Got it. I've just done it. Oh, sorry, I had to scroll down. Can you guys see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Great, no worries. So yeah, I'm working as one of the ICU registrars at Austin Health at the moment, and sort of sometimes flex up onto the senior reg roster. So I've got feel like I've had a fairly broad kind of overview at the moment of what it's like working in a tertiary ICU. The things I wanted to talk about, I haven't done a title slide per se, but the sort of things that I thought were important were, how do you get onto the training program? How do you get a job as a registrar? Because the program, getting onto the program and getting a job are two different things. And there's a bit of finesse to that, I think. And then I'm going to talk briefly about exams, and I'll briefly touch on kind of dual training, because Rachel felt that people might be interested in that, given my ED background. So getting on, there's a lot of resources that are worth looking at on the CICM website. It's quite well done. There's a lot of policies that I'd encourage you to read through. So you need to, the main things are primary medical degree, shouldn't be a problem. But the thing that is potentially going to be an issue is you need 6 months of experience or foundation training in ICU credited by the college. So I guess trying to preference that, planning your kind of early postgraduate journey carefully, such that you can line up that 6 months, is going to be a barrier to joining the college and to applying for the college. So you need to make sure you've got that before you can apply. In terms of the application process, it's changed a little bit. And I'll go through that in a bit more detail, but you ask them for an application process, and they'll send it to you. And then they only select once per year. So just make sure that you're kind of aware of when that is, and so you're ready, and you'd hate to miss it and then have to wait 12 months. And there's a lot of certified copies of things like medical degrees and I think citizenship and like APRA registration. So like there's a fair bit of paperwork involved. And then you need to look at getting 3 referees for that 6 months of foundation ICU that I talked about. So and the reference forms on the website, and with a marking grid attached. And it's, if I understand correctly, it's 2 consultants and 1 senior nurse. So as always, I would encourage you to be nice to the nurses, but now you have an extra incentive. So selection criteria is, this has changed a bit from when I got on, but in short, there's 3 really important aspects. There's a structured reference, so 2 fellows and a senior registered nurse, and they have to have worked with you, obviously. And then there's a structured CV with kind of points allocated for various things, so your qualifications and clinical experience. Research has got quite a lot of points there, so I guess getting involved in research early is good. I don't think the standard would, like, I'm sure a few audits would be fine, but having something in that box would be really helpful. And then they've recently introduced a situational judgment test, which I must say I didn't have to do, so I can't speak to that, but it sounds like it's a computed, like an online thing that you do from home through, I think it's Melbourne or Monash Uni that are running it. There's a trainee selection panel, so a bunch of people, including a member of the community, which I thought was a nice touch. And they attain a minimum entry standard rather than a ranking. So it's not that they rank everyone and then say, look, the top 70% get in. It's a minimum entry standard that they pick a score that they think makes for somebody who could be a good intensivist. And then you get told pretty quickly, and then that it's based on an aggregate score. Just be really careful with your references. So ask the right people. Unsatisfactory reference means you're unsuccessful automatically. It doesn't matter how good your CV is, even if your other reference is glowing. And there's a bit of an art to asking for referees. So if somebody seems hesitant or suggests that you are someone else, make sure you are someone else. Like, don't insist, because that means that they're gently telling you that maybe, they wouldn't have it might be them saying that they don't think they can give you as glowing a reference as you might like. And you only get 3 goes. So sooner the better, but also make sure you're ready, because you only get 3 goes. I think getting a job is something that's worth being aware of. So the usual pathway to critical care, which I'm sure I don't have to tell this audience, is you'll intern, you generally do a resident year of some description, and then PGY3, generally people start gunning for quick care jobs. And often there's an ED, ICU, and an anaesthetics stream. I wound up doing the ED stream because that was what I wanted to do. So just sort of make sure you kind of approach the person who try and work out early who the person who is responsible for, organizing that, and talking to them early and saying, look, what are the things you're looking for? They're usually very approachable and transparent about what they think, you could do to better your chances. And I think the thing that I can't stress enough is when you're an HMO in ICU, this should be seen very much as a job interview. And don't get me wrong, you should make sure you do your job really well. But every opportunity you can take to step up and show that, you're engaged in the process and you're engaged in what the unit does. Say, oh, can I do the handover in the morning? Just to, so that the unit gets to know you and sees that you're enthusiastic and has the opportunity to help you grow and give you feedback. And then if you can find a mentor who's happy to kind of bring you along for some research. Research is really tricky and it's very easy to get bite off more than you can chew. So small projects with a kind of obliging mentor are a good place to start. And then courses, things like ultrasound courses and basic are a really good place to start and would be good for your CV. I'll touch briefly on the exam. Now, as I was exempt from this exam, for better or worse. So I spoke to a few of my colleagues and asked them what their thoughts were, what should I say, to how should I offer advice to people who are kind of looking down the barrel of ICU training. The things that they wanted me to stress, well, so I guess the basics from the college website, and again, this is all available on the college website and very clear and transparent. So there's a lot of information on there that I would encourage you to read thoroughly. 5 attempts maximum, 2 sections, so there's a written and a viva. You need to get at least 45% in the written for 50% overall. So you can kind of scrape through the written, but you'd need to do pretty well in the viva to pass. Pass rate is pretty variable, but usually somewhere between 45 to 60%. And by pass rate, I mean the percentage of people who pass. According to my colleagues, they reckon 9 to 12, like the people who one of the people who I work with who, did very well in the primary exam, she said her estimate was 9 to 12 months of study, and you could do it in 6, but it would mean doing nothing else, probably, hundreds of hours, like talking easily hundreds of hours of study, maybe 1,000. It sets you up well for understanding what's happening and the rationale behind what's happening and why. And the earlier you start studying and sitting the exam, it will probably mean that you learn more on shift because you understand what's happening and why. And it can be helpful with that imposter syndrome where you feel like, once you pass the primary, you start feeling like a real ICU registrar. Was my experience with ED anyway. So that's something worth being aware of. The exam itself, there's 2 papers, 10 SAQs, 50 MCQs per paper. And you get 2.5 hours. So it's pretty time pressured. Pass rate I've already talked about. Sorry, I haven't put that here. And I've talked about the 45% in both sections. There's 8 cross-table vivas, which you get invited to if you pass the written, which are 12 minutes each, 2 minutes of reading and 10 minutes of talking, which can be pretty intense. Rachel asked me to talk briefly about the second part exam, which I can speak with some authority, given I just sat it twice. So it's really difficult, would be what I'd say. There's 30 SAQs, 2 papers, 2.5 hours per paper. The written is a real ordeal. It's very time pressured. There's no time to stop writing. Like it's something that you want to be ready for, and you should start preparing for early and kind of aggressively, I would say. There's a viva, which is 8 stations, and then I've cut it off here. But there's 2 hot cases, which are when you go to a real ICU, which is not your ICU, and with examiners from the college who you don't know, and you see you're put in front of a patient, given 2 minutes reading time in a stem, and then you examine the patient for 10 minutes, including all their bedside things, like the pumps and the ventilator, and then you're asked to speak about the patient for 10 minutes, including some questions from the examiners. It's a really, really grueling exam. I found it very difficult, but it's a fairly important process of the preparation for that is, I think it's a really instrumental part in developing as a trainee. So training in general, I think I hope I'm not running over time, but there's a lot to talk about. So training in general, rotations, I think anaesthetics is the real thing that is, I can't emphasize enough that you should, it's almost worth choosing your jobs like I would be tactical about where you take jobs. If it means taking a job at a smaller hospital with better access to anaesthetics as a junior registrar, that may be a better move. There's a lot of kind of people approaching the end of the training, including myself, who have really struggled to get enough anaesthetics, because you're competing with all the ED guys, all the people who want to be anaesthetists, and all the anaesthetic trainees for those jobs. So being kind of tactical about how you get your anaesthetic exposure is important, and something to plan very early. And one of my colleagues mentioned that the college will accredit rotations in retrospect, but this requires yet more paperwork. And so getting a letter of, particularly if you've worked interstate or at different hospitals, getting a letter of service before you change health network is really important. And that needs to detail actual rotations, the level of training you were at, and the date you left the job. Rachel asked me to briefly touch on dual training. It's becoming less and less common. The ICU college and the anaesthetic college were at one stage amalgamated. And so there were classically a lot of ICU anaesthetists. And then there's also a lot of physician anaesthetists, and there's quite a reasonable number of physician intensivists, and a reasonable number of ED intensivists as well. And then there's just kind of, and increasingly there's people who are just who've just done ICU training. There's nothing right or wrong with dual training. Currently, the fellowship of another college currently exempts you from the primary exam. So it's kind of 2 exams for the price of 1. So in ED anyway, so primary and fellowship, and then I was exempt from the primary. I don't think it's shorter in terms of time. I think if you do, particularly did physicians, I'd let perhaps a physician trained intensivist speak more to this, but you know, if you really want to be an intensivist and you want to add physician's training to your bow, I'd choose really carefully. So something like respiratory, ID, or renal would be really useful. I don't like ED. I think I didn't plan my career particularly well, and like I enjoyed ED and really loved it and still do. But I love ICU more. I don't know if I necessarily would have taken the same pathway I did. I don't necessarily regret it, but it took longer. And if time to being a consultant is important to you, then it probably isn't. It doesn't. ED in particular, I can't necessarily recommend doing both just for the sake of having a second qualification. And the final thing I just wanted to mention was some useful resources. So I think the training selection process on the college website is really critical. And they've also got a policy on recognition of prior learning, which if you're kind of, got rotations elsewhere that you want to get done. And the exam stuff, particularly when you're sort of looking down the barrel of the primaries in particular, there's FAQs, which are quite good. There's previous exam reports which have the questions and like the actual examiner response. They sort of say, oh, look, this question was done poorly. This is why it was done poorly. They're a goldmine, and they exist for the second part exam as well. And they talk about pass rates and kind of that sort of stuff as well. So they're a real good resource for the exam in particular, in terms of just make sure you're really familiar with the process, because a lot of technique goes into exams. And that is all I have. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Simon. That was very detailed and good summary of the application process into intensive care training, as well as shedding some light on possibilities of dual training. We'll move on to our next speaker now, just for the sake of time. We have Dr. Caleb Fisher, who's an intensivist at Austin Health. He completed dual overseas fellowships and has a very strong interest in the hemostatic abnormalities of liver disease and improving methods in management of hyperammonemia. Outside of work, he's a very proud father of 2 highly active children. Take it away, Dr. Caleb Fisher. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much for the invitation, guys, and for everyone making time this evening to come along as I just navigate the technology, which is always fun to be able to get. I do note that photo of me that I provided is suspiciously about 8 years younger than I actually am, and I'm happy to keep it that way for the moment going forward. Just to bring us back on time a little bit, I'm going to talk about a day in the life of an ICU consultant from my perspective, a little bit about my journey of how I've ended up where I am, and a little bit about what interests that I have that aren't looking after patients per se in my professional roles, because I think at the end of the day, these are the ones that make your life really, I wouldn't say bearable, but give you a lot of diversity to your work that is unique to intensive care. Normally in these settings, I try and get an idea of how many people want to do anaesthesia versus ICU, but it's a bit harder today. But hopefully there are some people online who are hanging out, not just hanging out for the anaesthetist, but want to hear what the ICU consultant has to say. So how have I ended up here tonight? Well, unfortunately, I'm a bit Austin through and through. Somewhere just around the year 2000, I did my internship here back when I was a part of Austin Northern, because they were joined together, those hospitals. And then I did my residency here as well. But I was always interested in critical care, and I really wasn't sure about how or why to do critical care. ED is one pathway, anesthesia is clearly quite an obvious pathway. But at the Austin Hospital, there were a number of intensivists who were physicians. So in one of the first critical care years in Melbourne, I was a critical HME.
Please. Visiting hours have now concluded. Visiting hours have now concluded.
Oh, apologies, that is the speaker above my desk. So I did a crit care HMO year, which I would recommend for everybody these days before embarking down any course of critical care. And I went into this looking to do ICU or anaesthesia, or I'm not really sure. And I had a couple of rotations, but the most important one, I guess, was Bendigo Intensive Care Unit, where I was luckily exposed to being an ICU registrar as a HMO3, but also exposed to some people who had ended up quite significant mentors in the longer term. And they really drove my interest in intensive care as a specialty. And as a consequence of working with them, I decided to go via the path, physician's pathway, back when you could do this. And I did the physician's exams, passed them, and started my ICU training. And then I came back to the Austin, surprise, surprise, and did most of my training here, went to the Royal Melbourne, finished my exams, and then really didn't have much option about what I could do due to a very limited pool of jobs at this point in time. It's about 8-9 years ago. So I decided to go overseas. And I went to the UK, where I did just lived there for 2.5 years, and I did dual fellowships, which was a really most important thing I've done in my career. And it gave me a great time away, lots of opportunities, and experience working with different people in different systems. It's really, I think, helped my growth. And reluctantly, I had returned to Australia, and I took up a consultant position here at the Austin. So what do I do on a day-to-day basis? Now, some people will work in ICU, some will haven't. There is not a lot different to what we do in ICU compared to what happens on the ward, except probably just the density of the team. I know when I was a resident, I never saw the consultant at all. But here, you unfortunately get stuck with the consultant most of the day. So we do a ward round as a consultant registrar, plus a resident, plus or minus a medical student. And this starts off by taking handover to determine what mischief has occurred overnight and what problems need to be fixed. And then you go and review all the patients in the history, examination, investigations, and plan. We do that for 10, 12 patients a day. How we see the new patients, our patients varies, whether we just see the new patients first, the sickest patients, or if there's lots of bed pressures in the hospital, we see the dischargeable patients first. But either or, the pattern's the same group of people going around, talking to the bedside nurse, examining the patient, identifying the issues, writing a detailed structured plan for the nursing staff, and then moving on to the next one. Clearly, things can change, and then you might have to backtrack back, or someone deteriorates and you have to backtrack again and spend a bit more time there. But the process is pretty much similar to what happens on the ward, just in a very smaller area with a smaller number of patients. The most important thing after this is the coffee, and having a coffee as a team is really important. I think it's the benefit. So unlike your consultant ward rounds on the ward, whereby that might happen once a week, this should happen every day. And in fact, I'll put it out there that it's the most important role that a consultant has, is to get the coffee for the residents and the registrars. Because as you're sitting back to go to your office, the resident, the registrar is sitting back doing the tasks. And the tasks are very similar to the ward, where they are talking to teams, arranging imaging, transfers of patients, admitting new patients, and then lines of procedures, of which there is not an insignificant amount, given it is ICU and everything we do is invasive. There is still paperwork. I use the word paperwork to include the online version these days, but that also happens at consultant level as well. So don't be alarmed, but there is a significant amount of paperwork in the intensive care unit. And then from my perspective, I go back to my office and I finish my coffee, and then I have to do my paperwork, which usually involves doing a lot of the administrative data for the patients. And then it's a matter of attending administration meetings, teaching and research. Now, teaching and research, given I work in a tertiary/quaternary centre, is a really important part of my workday. Teaching is at multiple levels. It's from the senior registrars and the fellows to the registrars as part of the training, but also at the HMO level. Because we're also involved significantly in outreach in the ICU, we also do a lot of outreach teaching. So that involves running simulations with general medical registrars, which is a new thing, but also giving tutors to the residents and interns about how to recognise and respond to deteriorating patient. So that process of teaching the skills and the knowledge that comes within critical care, which is applicable to many specialties in ICU, is a really important factor of the work. Research, some people love it, some people don't like it. I like it a bit, is really important, and research is slow. And research does involve a lot of time. So you'll find yourself doing bits of research here and there along the way. A lot of that will involve actually just starting data collection or doing the ethics for it, or discussing with peers and colleagues and collaborators about what project is currently working, or collecting data. The exciting part's trying to write it up. That might take an extra 12 months as well. So once you get a paper published, it may take 2 years, but it's actually a really, really heavily invested process to get to that point. So research planning and research is slow, but very valuable. I've mentioned that before. Now, many ICUs, particularly in metropolitan Melbourne, have high fractions or staff intensivists, or people who are 0.5, 0.6 or above in intensive care. I'm 0.8. And that gives me a significant amount of time to do the education, the research, but also contribute to the day-to-day running of the department, because you are unfortunately around a fair bit. In contrast to that, I also work in Bendigo Hospital because I am a country boy to start off with, and I'm only 0.1 to 0.2 up there. And that gives a completely different perspective on intensive care. And most importantly, because I have a lower fraction, I don't do a lot of the education, I don't do a lot of their research, and I most definitely do not contribute to any of the day-to-day running or administration that runs into going into a hospital intensive care department. So once all those things are done, by about 1,600 hours, we do it all over again. And this is what frustrates the hell out of my wife when she came into ICU as a rotation, is the fact that all you do is stand around, you pontificate on the patient, don't make any changes. And then when you get back to the start, you do it all over again. So at about 4 o'clock, we do a ward round again, same team, and review the patient, the history, examination, investigation, and issues. And it's really important this period, I'm not being slightly facetious, in that this is the plan for the evening. 24/7 is the hospital these days. ICU is most definitely 24/7. So having a detailed plan going into the evening is really important to make sure that patients' trajectories are continue. And if there's any deviations from that trajectory, that the people who know them the best, which is us as that team, because we've spent a whole day doing 2 ward rounds on them, are able to hand that over to the night team, night registrar, night consultant, to ensure that the patient's care is continued on. I know that sounds horribly boring, but I think ICU is an amazing specialty. These patients are totally dependent on ourselves to get better. They really are. So many aspects we take for granted in the intensive care unit is completely foreign to everybody else, not only in the hospital, but certainly in the community. We get to see extremes of pathology and physiology. We all know the very random diseases and random conditions because we get to see them, because they usually imply that you're very sick. We have great responsibility because we are dealing with families at a time of great distress and grief, and we have to usually help them navigate their loved one's illness, whether that's through end up dying in intensive care, or through the journey of the shock of the illness to the process of recovery. But that takes a lot of time, and it's really important that we do this in a very patient and family-centered way. We also have a significant outreach, as I mentioned before, in the intensive care unit, and that's to provide support to the other surgical specialties, particularly the surgeons. So many patients would have poorer outcomes if it wasn't for ourselves being able to provide support to the ward nursing staff as well. All we do is really provide a safety net for patients in the hospital to help other specialties get the patients better by doing their required interventions. And that's a great honour to be able to be involved with so many different specialties and help patients, not just in the ICU, but outside. But what about my aspects? Well, I'm really interested in critical care hepatology. Why is that? Probably because no one else is. I give a talk on liver disease, and I point out that one of the textbooks on my desk, Guyton and Hall, has 7 pages on the liver in it. 7 pages. So no one understands it, no one learns about it. Probably why I fall into this little niche area. I find it practically useful because I work in a centre that does acute liver failure and liver transplantation. But it's also allowed me via my overseas fellowships and interest is to have lots of links with both national centres, but also international centres in the UK and North America as well, whereby we are able to work together in a really collaborative sense to actually improve patient outcomes by research and education. And that's really important. But most importantly, I could not do this without my family. And this is my family, as you can see there. ICU has allowed me to go overseas and travel the world. My wife is a consultant rheumatologist who works very busily as well, but she's been able to travel with us on our journeys to Greece up the top, to Austria in the bottom, and somewhere in Southeast Asia, I can't remember where, all clearly recently. And spending time with my kids outdoors has been an important part of keeping me balanced from my time in intensive care unit. They certainly do note that I'm not around certain nights like tonight. However, they do know that work is only a part of what we do. It's not the most important thing we do. And I'll not just stop sharing.
Thank you, Kel, for that. That was very interesting, particularly highlighting the diversity in intensive care medicine and the complexity in pathology and rare conditions, but also how you can have a very diverse career from clinical to teaching to having a special interest and having time for family as well. Thank you for that. It was very insightful. We'll move on to our final speaker for the intensivist. Rachel just moved. Yeah, intensivist, a author in the extracorporeal life support organisation, adult ECPR international guideline, has been doing research in the as well as an adjunct lecturer at Monash University, and has also done some work with international retrieval experience as well. So thank you, Sasha, take it away.
Thanks, Anthony. Thanks very much for inviting me to talk to you tonight about life as an ICU consultant. I'll just load my slides. So I like Caleb, I suppose I've had a slightly different arrival into ICU. I trained in the UK at Oxford and worked in the NHS for 5 years. And then arrived in Australia 12 years ago or 13 years ago for a 1-year working holiday, and Queensland, starting off in North Queensland in Townsville, and then worked in Townsville and Mackay and Sunshine Coast and Brisbane, then Melbourne. I've got stuck in Melbourne for the last 7 years, but I guess I'm heading south, so maybe Tasmania next. And I've been at the Alfred for 7 years. Working in the ICU, and I think I was trying to think full-time equivalents as a fractional. I think I'm about a 1.3 at the Alfred. So why pursue a career in ICU? Well, I've kind of broke it. It's very quick, just 3 kind of major domains. The first domain is teamwork and it's multidisciplinary. So we work with everybody. With the physios, dietitians, with every conceivable specialty. We even work with the dermatologists. And there aren't many specialties where you get exposed to all of your colleagues working in the hospital, and you get to form relationships with them and get to look after their patients jointly. And I think that's really a great appeal to ICU, is that interaction, that social interaction with all the different specialties, and learning more about their specialties as you look after their patients. So in terms of our team, I've just got some photos really. This is our ICU team. We do a lot of ECMO, so they're pushing ECMO consoles there across the walkway at the Alfred, very reminiscent of the Beatles. And in the bottom right, we're doing a lot of simulation amongst the ICU team. And this is our ECPR program, but this is one of our consultant meetings. We just decide to throw an arrested dummy and then get a couple of people to start the process of resuscitating, and people are filming, and it's all pretty kind of good fun. And I couldn't find a photo of our cardiologist, so I've put a photo up of one of their angiograms. But again, we're a big cardiac center, so we work a lot with our cardiologists and our cardiac surgeons as well. We have lots of machines that go ping, and sometimes we get to take those machines out of the hospital. For those of you who don't know about machines that go ping, I've got a little 45-second clip to show you, and I'm going to see if this does that come up. Just let me know if you can see that. Okay, let me just change the sharing. 2 seconds. Stop share, and I'll reshare this one. Hopefully that's now come up.
Isn't it? Yes. Yes. More apparatus, please, nurse. The EEG, the BP monitor, and the AVV.
Yes, certainly, Doctor.
And get the machine that goes bing, and get the most expensive machines in case the administrator comes. Lovely, lovely. Jolly good, that's better, that's much, much better. Yes, more like it. Still something missing, though. Patient.
So there we go. Machines that go ping. We've got lots of those, and you know, that's a part of kind of ICU in reality is you know, you get to play with all these toys. Share 2 seconds, back up. And here they are. We get ventilators, ultrasound machines. You can do echo and all sorts of diagnostic ultrasounds. We've got ECMO machines for severe respiratory failure and severe cardiac failure. We get EEGs and SSEPs, that's the bottom left. So if you're interested in tech, then ICU is a great place to be. You've got exposure to all of these things and opportunity to learn about them. And very difficult to be a master of all. So you end up being a sort of jack of all trades, and then you choose, you know, which particular tech you want to get particularly sort of geeky on and learn all about. We also get to take this expensive machines out of the hospital. The administrators allow us out from time to time, which is more than can be said of our poor friends in anesthesia, locked in their chambers. So, you know, we get jets to play with, rapid response cars. You can tell we're in Queensland because this guy's got a hat, very kind of fancy hat with his fluoro jacket. So they even let us go interstate. And like the anaesthetist, you still have time. You can see I'm doing my Sudoku or checking my emails on my phone whilst we get flown around the country. So, you know, you still get some of those anesthetic, you know, bonuses. Obviously, you get to have to carry some of this stuff. Is Vin Pellegrino, our head of ECMO, carrying a totally outlandishly sized backpack with the ECMO gear. It's almost as big as he is. I don't know how he's able to stand up straight. We also do a bit of veterinary science. Here we are catching a mouse that's escaped in the ICU offices with David Pilcher, one of the professors. And talking of professors, as Caleb also mentioned, there's quite a bit of research and academics which you can get into. And that basically is our way of saying we don't know very much about ICU, so therefore we need to do a lot of research to try and find out a bit more about it. So there is lots of academia. But we also love our teaching. So we're very passionate about what little we do know, and we're prepared to teach that. So here's some of the teaching. We've got mannequins and models, and again, more ECMO training and research going on there, ECPR, and that's obviously my area of interest. And then there's even a bit of, I've put here a little detective. This was a patient who had severe pulmonary hypertension. We couldn't work out why, and she was crushing endone and sticking it down her PICC line. Poor thing, but it took us a little while to work that one out. So you can also be a detective if you want to be. Here we are researching how much the overhead gantry can support. It's obviously can take significant weight loads. We also compare our outcomes here. This is me. Top right is a lactate versus time graph. I think I've proved fairly convincingly, S is me, I'm on the day shift and the lactate seems to be well controlled. And then when Paul Nixon, one of my colleagues, comes on for the night shift, the lactate goes completely out of control, and then I have to come back on and start sort of chasing it down again. So, so really kind of high quality research gets done in our departments. We get to wear some of this amazing paraphernalia for the COVID pandemic. So that was a real insight. I seem very happy, but to be honest, this outfit was absolutely useless. Couldn't hear anything because of the fan. So it was mostly used for just sort of scaring the rest of the staff. Father Christmas or Santa Claus comes to ICU. So another reason to come and work. Every year you'll see Father Christmas come through the ICU handing out presents, and I don't think that happens. I don't think he visits the anaesthetic department, unfortunately, just because they've not been good all year. And there's nearly always time to have a coffee, particularly before big decisions. Caleb's already said this. Here's Steve McLaughlin, our director of our department, and Professor Andrew Udi, one of the deputy heads, and they look pretty happy. I mean, they're having coffee, they look cheerful, they're at work. I mean, surely that could be a good advert for working in ICU. There's TV opportunities as well. So you've got Vin there, obviously on the ABC News, and Steve as well on 60 Minutes. So if you fancy yourself on the TV, then please, consider an opportunity to be come and work in the ICU. But most days you mostly feel like this, which is trying to be a sheepdog and herd the sheep and the patients and the staff in the right direction. And it's not always entirely successful, but it is almost always good fun. But really, lastly, and probably the most serious bit of my talk, is it's about being involved in some amazing stories. And ICU, you're part of a team where you will look after people at their most sick and crisis sort of times, and you will guide them and their families through it. And that's a huge honor and responsibility. I feel very grateful to be, play that part of that role as an ICU consultant. So this is Petra, who was someone who had a cardiac arrest whilst out running on the beach in Melbourne, and she ultimately ended up needing a heart transplant after many months of critical ICU therapies, and a lot of people involved in her journey, and she's done amazingly well. And it was a real privilege to be a part of that team that looked after her. And that's it. Thank you. If you've got any questions about ICU, please feel free to reach out. Be happy to answer them. And obviously we've got the questions coming up shortly.
Thank you, Sash. I think you just told everyone how fun ICU can be, from playing with machines, having TV time potentially, some costumes as well, and Santa Claus visiting. And also I think the take-home message from both yourself and Caleb has been there's always time for coffee, but also that ICU can be such a humbling experience, I guess, in terms of dealing with the most vulnerable patients. So thank you so much for that. It was incredibly insightful. I think we're now up to our question time. So I will hand over to Matt, and we'll also show the questions on the screen to filter through those.
Hey everyone. So we've got a few popular questions. Top of the list is, how do you go about finding a good research mentor? Do we have any volunteers from our speakers to answer that?
I'm conscious that I was the one who raised that, so I'm happy to take one for the team and try and address it. It's a big question. It's a really difficult thing to do. I think it's one of those things that you need to recognize it, like as Caleb alluded to, research is a really lengthy thing, and having maybe I'll dodge the question by saying what you should look for in a person who is a mentor with research. So I feel what you want is someone who understands how difficult that process can be and doesn't set you up to fail, or more importantly, sets you up to succeed. So I think the things you look like doing sort of, I generally suggest starting with like retrospective research where the data already exists. Doing prospective research as your first project is a really intimidating thing, and I think is likely to lead to a lot of frustration. And just be aware that if you engage in a research project, you will be held responsible for finishing it, and it can reflect really poorly on you if you don't. So to come back to the question, finding a good research mentor, I think when you work in a unit, suss out who the people that are doing good research in that unit. And if you work in a kind of big tertiary unit, there's likely to be a few people. There's likely to be a director of research. And if you work with someone and they seem like the sort of person that you feel you can trust, like it's kind of a vibe in some respects. It's like, when I've worked with this person, do I feel like I can trust them, that, that they're the sort of person who'd tell me what I needed to hear and will be willing to support you, because it's really like, it's quite an ordeal supporting someone through a research project. I can say, having recently been supported through one, and I had a very kind and patient mentor who was very helpful.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's really sound advice. The next most popular question is probably one that I'm quite interested in. Which is the best pathway to take in PGY2 prior to pursuing critical care? Are there any opinions that anyone holds quite strongly?
I'll take this one, only because I'm the Critical Care HMO supervisor and recruiter for the Austin. So I think the best thing to do is to apply widely. All the critical care programs are very good. All of them have a varied mixture of anesthesia, ED, and ICU, and have a look at the requirements of which each one does and how it lines up with what you want to do for your career goal, and then apply very widely. The general advice I give to everybody is to really think about how you can make your CV the strongest it can be. And I know that everyone's default position when they get told that, and they look at their blank piece of paper and think, what on earth have I done to be able to fill this up? But you're a HMO2 or 3. No one's expecting you to have done major things. So my advice is always to look back at in your either in your undergraduate degree or even your last couple of years of high school, and look at things that make you stand out, whether it be academic excellence or sporting excellence. Both of those things highlight commitment. They highlight the ability to train or work towards a goal and achieve a goal. So they're important messages to get across. Look outside your own workplace and think, have I been a captain of a sporting team? Do I have interest? Am I more socially inclined, or am I strong in the environment? Think in those areas and highlight those facts about yourself. And then in the workplace, look at teaching. Everyone's got the opportunity to teach. I know I'm a very big fan of near peer education. So making sure that you've done bits and pieces it doesn't have to be a formalized role within a clinical school, but certainly been involved in teaching both undergraduate and maybe even if you're HMO3, been involved in educating intern education. I know that changes next year for foundation, but changing HMO 1s and 2s is really important. And then the research, be involved in an audit. As I mentioned, as Simon alluded to, research can be slow and takes time. So expecting to get a full research paper out is challenging. Most of us do research, or most people do research in the undergraduate. So try and maybe even build upon some of the connections you've made during your undergraduate to access audit. I don't think people are too worried about specific things. I know some of the anaesthetic crit cares very much do look at specific anaesthetic based research, but I think that's more of a minority as opposed to a general advice. And participate in audit, and every unit will have audit that needs done. So just approach the one of the senior registrars or one of the consultants and ask, and most people have little projects that are either halfway through or about to get off the ground. Now, if you do it, don't forget to get ethics, because you can't do much if you don't get ethics.
Thank you very much, Caleb. Appreciate it. Just specifically, I think this particular person might have wanted to know whether there's an advised stream in HMO2.
My apologies. I misread the question. And
no, that's okay. I mean, it's really valuable.
Random pathway. I apologize to everybody online. No. Each specialty brings their own difference to that. BPT gives you medicine, and the rotations you get as BPT 2 and 3 are actually the more specialised higher acuity specialties. Clearly, being a surgeon, it makes you more exposed to the theatre environment. And then again, if you do cardiac surgery as a rotation or neurosurgery, depending on your location, you will be exposed to higher acuity patients. But the same says for general stream and doing ED and working regionally, where there are many experiences that can be had that outside that are actually as equivalent to those experienced inside the quaternary hospital. So I don't think that the one stream itself has a significant impact. I think making sure your CV, bring back to my own point, the CV is as structured, as round as you can make it from yourself is probably far more important.
Thank you very much. I suppose if we have time for one last question, does the college have a preference on ICU related research? We've already, I suppose, covered that one, excuse me. How is the best way to ask for a reference, and how do you know someone will give you a perfect reference?
I'm happy to speak a little bit to this. As someone who has been both asked and has asked people for references, relatively recently, actually. So I think I wouldn't email. I think it's a very personal thing, and there's no right or wrong answers. But my feeling is that it's quite a personal thing. You're like, what you're doing is you're asking that person to trust you to go to the next hospital in the event that they give you, a good enough reference to get that job, and you're asking them to trust you that you won't embarrass them when you get there. So I think it can be hard. And I think, approaching someone who you trust and also who you think, not only who you think might give you a good reference, but someone who you think will be honest with you. So, and I think that's a really important thing is, if you speak to someone, who you really like and respect as a clinician, and they say, look, if they make some soft excuse, maybe you should ask someone else. We haven't really worked together much recently. That's a strong hint that they don't think they can hand on heart give you the reference that they'd like to. So in short, I would ask in person or on the phone. Try not to leave it to the last minute, because then it becomes a bit awkward because you're desperately trying to get hold of people the day before application is closed. And how do you know they'll give you a perfect 10 out of 10 reference? You won't, and they probably won't, and that's okay. No one's 10 out of 10. So don't worry about that. And I think if I was recruiting, and I'll let Caleb speak to this as someone who does recruit, but I'd be pretty suspicious if someone got all 10s. That's odd. So just don't stress too much about it, but just think about who you're going to ask, and ask them politely, respectfully, and listen to what they say rather than just making sure you ask.
Beautiful. Okay, well, thank you both for your contributions. Really appreciate it. I believe right now we might have a short break for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we might give a couple of sponsors who have arrived the opportunity to have a brief chat with you guys. So let's have a brief intermission. If there's any further questions you'd like to ask audience, please make sure you post them on Slido if anything else comes to mind, and we'll try and address it at the end. Okay. In the meantime, let's have a short break and be back in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Caleb, Sasha, and Simon, thank you so much. That was really helpful. Definitely can take some hints next year when I'm applying for my HMO3 job.
It's all good. Thank you very much for the invitation. You're doing a good job, guys, by being able to provide these sessions with we've been missing these things for about 2 years, and I think there's a lot of information gaps in people, so you guys are filling in that gap really well. So thank you for all your hard efforts in this space.
No worries. Thank you.
Yep,
Would you-
I echo all that. Well done, guys. Great job. And yeah, thanks for inviting me. And if it's okay, I'm going to duck off now. If that's okay.
Yes, no worries. Thank you for joining us from the UK. Nice to see you again, Sasha. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey, Sasha, keep up.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I haven't got much to add to that, but yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a really important thing you're doing, and I'm really glad that you're doing it.
Thanks for coming, Simon.
No problem.
And I'm going to zone out too. Thank you very much, guys. I better go back and check on some patients. Thanks for the invitation. Appreciate it. Good luck with the rest of the evening.
No worries. See you guys around. Bye.
Thank you. Take care. Appreciate your help.
Yeah, I've got to go help with bedtime, so not quite, not quite as mission critical, but I think it's probably best that I ran. But yeah, no, really well done, guys. I think it's a great session. I'll catch up with you soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. We have 64 in the breakout room. Is that like unassigned people or? Oh no, that's okay. We have our breakout room for our speakers. So I think Adam has arrived. You're on mute, Rachel.
Yep. So Adam's and Kim and with Hannah.
Yeah. Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, lovely. Shall we? What time do we want to read?
How about 7:40, or is that too late? That's probably too late.
Well, I don't. Yeah, our first anaesthetic speaker was for 7:40. We can start
Okay.
just before.
Yeah, and Kim's going to speak, so we'll need like 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'll quickly grab a drink of water and then I'll come back and we can restart.
Yep.
Yeah, no
Cool.
worries. I think 7:38, 7:40, like just before 7:40. That's
7,
fine.
yeah, 7:38.
Yeah, that's 7:38. We'll resume. So anyone who's online will resume at 7:38. Oh, hi, Tzu Yen. How you going?
Hi, Anthea. Matt,
I can.
I've joined. I'm
Lovely,
alive.
Thank you.
I'll just move you into the breakout room with.
Oh, we've got a breakout room with all the other anaesthetic speakers for tonight for debriefing before starting at 7:38-ish.
Yep.
Hey, Hannah, can I join that breakout room, or is that just Rachel, sorry, can I join that breakout room, or we'll just stay in the main room?
Well, yeah, I'll send you in there.
Okay.
And then I'll pull you back.
Yeah, pull me back when times. Thank you.
Hey,
Cool. Ready? They're ready to come back. I'm going to close the breakout room.
Yep. Are we recording?
Yep.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you've had the opportunity to have a quick break. Since we've got Kim here from Amboss, before we proceed with anaesthetics, we might quickly give her the opportunity just to say hi. So thank you very much, Kim, for coming along. We really appreciate your support.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Am I able to share my screen or?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
No, host disabled screen sharing. Can't really share
Yep,
my
sorry,
screen
I'm
right
making
now.
co-host. Done. Should be able to screen share now.
Yep, that works. Thank you so much. Yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having us. My name is Kim. I'm working as a partnership manager for Amboss here in Australia. I'm a doctor from Germany, studied medicine in Germany and worked for 2 years in orthopedic surgery before I joined the Amboss team over here to explain a little bit more about Amboss, which is a platform that I have heavily used throughout my entire time at university, but also when I was actually working in the hospital. Amboss is a medical education platform that is meant to support medical students and doctors worldwide in their daily practice by delivering easily accessible evidence-based information within seconds on the wards. We initially started having a student product that a lot of the Australian medical students also use to study for their exams. However, we are currently also adding more and more content to the platform and are creating a new clinician product that will support junior doctors on the wards to make important information when they have patients with a certain disease, for example, so that they can quickly look up guidelines, important diagnostics or management approaches. And therefore, Amboss can be your clinical companion, so to say. We do have 2 mobile apps, and I think, the Amboss Knowledge app, which is the library, is actually really, really awesome. The app works offline as well, so if you don't have great reception in the hospital, you can still look at all the relevant content that is there. We did an internal study with over 2,600 of our users, asking them how often they actually changed their initial clinical decision or approach after checking an Amboss article. And 47% of the physicians that we asked said that they do change their clinical decision after checking an Amboss article, and that effect has definitely been stronger, of course, amongst younger clinicians that are still in training. And of course, you kind of want to be sure that what you are doing is the right thing and that you have the right approach, do the right diagnostics when you have a patient with a certain condition. There are 2 ways to kind of access this clinical information in Amboss at the moment. So if you have an account, you can pretty much just use this toggle item that we have if you go into a certain article, and then you will get the clinical information added in blue to your article. So it's kind of like more in-depth information that is beyond the bullet point student kind of level that we have in the platform that is helpful for exams. Or you can also switch on the clinician mode in your account settings for good, so that you always see this clinician content. There is also a brand new drug database embedded in Amboss now. It's an external drug database and an independent one that is referenced quite heavily by other resources as well. But it is embedded in Amboss. So if you type in any drug and you look out for the drug icon, then you can pull up this catalog style article that gives you further advice on drugs, and it's also connected to our normal Amboss articles. So if you hover over any terms in there or click on other conditions like angioedema, for example, it will then still open up that Amboss article to that. And we do have a free trial code for everyone who's here tonight. I'll also copy this code and put it in the chat. This code gives you 14 days of free Amboss Plus access, and that allows you to just explore the platform a little bit, have a closer look if you would find that useful for your daily practice. And I hope you guys will enjoy this free trial. And we are also always happy to, of course, set up any discussions for any group discounts, for example, or also for hospital related license discussions. So yeah, thanks so much for having us. If there are any questions, you can always contact me at kkE@ambos.com, and I'll make sure to answer as quick as I can. Thanks so much for having us, and have a great evening, everyone.
Thank you, Kate. Since we've got the opportunity, I will quickly like to acknowledge Avant, who have been a year-long sponsor for us as well. Unfortunately, they have been unable to make it because of unforeseen circumstances. But again, just a shout out to Avant alongside Dr. On Call for their sponsorship of this event, and hopefully going forward. All right, guys, anaesthetics time.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt, and thank you, Kim. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker for our anaesthetic talk, Dr. Adam Bisiani, a critical HMO PGY4 at the Royal Melbourne Hospital, is currently doing his anaesthetic rotation as part of his Critical Care HMO year at Royal Melbourne, and will be doing basic training in the Northwest rotational scheme next year. And he loves the outdoors, and his dog is featured there, which is absolutely adorable. So take it away, Adam. Thank you.
Can I just share my screen? Here we go. All right, is that working?
Yeah.
Excellent. So I'm Adam. I'm one of the critical care HMOs at Royal Melbourne, as you just heard. I've been asked to talk about the experience and kind of the process of applying to anaesthetics training at the moment. I have some pretty recent experience with that. So I'm going to specifically talk about the Victorian pathway. So anaesthetics training is the pathways in the junior years are pretty widely varied state to state. The training that's run on the program is very similar and the requirements are really national, but it's all pretty state-based. So with regards to Victoria, if you look up for a flow sheet of anaesthetics training, this is what you'll find. Obviously, the bulk of the information is about what's in the middle, so the middle 5 years, which I have no experience with and won't talk to today. So I'll be focusing on this part, and particularly the big gap they leave between being PGY1 and getting onto training. Obviously, the requirements there are that you've completed 104 weeks, so your internship, and then another year to get onto training, but there's probably a bit more than that, and the fees have gone up since then. So this is my journey into anaesthetics training. So I was at med school through Monash. I then sat down at Royal Melbourne and not really moved for the last few years. I saw there's a question about whether you do a surgical year or a general year as a PGY2. I did a surgical year. Moving from year 2 to year 3, I didn't actually progress into a critical care year at that point, so I sidestepped into my general year, where I orchestrated a few rotations in cardiology, ENT, rural ED, as was mentioned before, and then progressed into the critical care year and then onto the program for next year in Northwest. So that's one of the regional rotational schemes. So talking to the critical care years or the resident years, so around, say you're doing your general year or your surgical year, typically the questions are around what kind of rotations you want to do, and it's pretty similar to the critical care response. So if you're, the ICU response. So if you're primarily you should do things you're interested in. That's what I was trying to do. I wasn't dead set on anaesthetics, so I was kind of testing the waters to see if there's anything I liked more or anything I liked differently. So I found that important for me, and I think that's important to work out. You can get time in critical care fields, so ICU, emergency, anaesthetics, depending on your hospital, you can get that in general years, but it's becoming rarer. Surgical rotations, I found that year pretty invaluable. So my time in theatre meant I understood rotations better. I understood surgery better. I understood kind of the flow of theatre, and it means when you do get into an anaesthetics room, you're a little bit less useless. Typically very useless. And then physiology, heavy medical rotations are helpful. So I found cardiology incredibly helpful, but things like respiratory and renal definitely have their place as well. Critical care years are pretty, my understanding is they're quite unique to Victoria. I think they're in New South Wales as well, but typically quite unique to Victoria. It's a bit of a try before you buy. So it's a bit for you, it's a try before you buy. So you get to, spend 6 months being what is essentially an introductory trainee. 6 months or 3 months, depending where you are, you get to try anaesthetics, see if you're a fit. But importantly, it's the departments get to see if you're a fit as well. So you have to be, this notion in anaesthetics that you have to be the right kind of person so that you be a good anaesthetist, but you get along with all of your colleagues. and you'll fit the specialty and the requirements and the people in it. But where the different types of critical care years, so applied broadly, lots of hospitals have multiple streams of critical care years. So typically they're divided into anaesthetics and then non-anaesthetics with a focus on ICU or ED. And that preference point either comes at the application point where you apply to the anaesthetic stream or the ICU stream, like they do at St. V's, I believe, or at other centres, you apply centrally to a critical care year and then preference subsequently. So that's just something to be aware of when you're applying broadly and kind of picking where you want to go. The applications, so there's kind of two ways to train. Traditionally, it was probably more an independent / hospital-based model, but it's been a rotational model in Victoria for quite a long time now. And the independent jobs are actually becoming less numerous. So the independent jobs, you basically just apply to the hospital. They have to be accredited by ANZCO for training, and you take a 12-month position there. Then you go to ANZCO and you say, I've got my 12-month position, and they'll accredit you for a year of training. Not all of those centres can take you for 4 years, so often you have to move around and find those jobs yourself. The rotational schemes are administered by the Victorian Anaesthetic Training Committee, and they kind of oversee the application of everyone into the 4 different rotational schemes. And those schemes are made up of 4 years of jobs. They make sure you meet your requirements, you get supervision, teaching for the primary and secondary exam. And they're largely seen as a more structured approach to training. The rotational schemes are the Northwestern, Eastern, Monash and Rural, and then your independent schemes. They're pretty variable. Which hospitals have them each year, it does change. Shepparton typically consistently has them, so does Western, but this year Ballarat had one as well. And then, of course, there's interstate independent programs, which are more common. South Australia, all of the major hospitals in South Australia have independent training positions, and Darwin does as well. And so they're all options. Within the rotational scheme, which is, as you can see here, this is a graph of my knowledge deteriorating as you go across it. So I know the most about Northwest, somewhat about Eastern, less about Monash and less about Rural. They're the major hospitals within each rotational network. And the critical care years of those sites roughly feed into those training schemes. So if you're a critical care anaesthetics resident at St. Vincent's, you will largely feed into the Eastern rotational scheme. I know within the Northwest, if they have a trainee who's a critical care resident who applies for training, that is actually a score given to them in the application, which moves them up, the kind of increases their chance to get interviewed. So typically the 40 people they interview are all critical care residents from those regions. There are outliers, but typically that's how it works. The VATC is very officially administered through a Facebook page. Not sure why, that's just how it's done. And they give you regular updates. So with regards to the timing, so they'll issue this document on that Facebook page early in the year, and it has all the dates. You don't want to miss the information evening where they'll talk through all the rotational schemes, but it also gives you the dates for your applications, referees, which is useful. And it's useful to keep track of everything. You don't want to miss these dates. The information evening is definitely something you should go to. You can go online or in person. If you go in person, you get to see how nice ANZCO House is. Right. I was asked to talk to references, and I know this was mentioned in ICU. So with regards to anaesthetics, they'll stand up at the information day and they'll say you need 3 references, and they basically all need to be anaesthetists, and they need to be recent. So the more recent is better, because if you're say you've done an anaesthetics term and you're reaching back 12 months to get a reference, it's a question of why didn't you get one more recently? So as recent as you can. And then St. Vincent's came out and said explicitly they wanted 3. Most of them are happy with 2 ± 1 in a different field, but they encourage you to make it from critical care. So maybe an ICU consultant you have a good relationship with. The things I was considering when it came to picking my referees, I was in a bit of a tight spot that a lot of people run into, in that you're doing anaesthetics in the second term of your year, and that's when applications happen. So you've got a very quick period to kind of hone in consultants, build relationships, and then ask them to support you. I think for me, it was important to remember that you're actually giving someone a lot of unpaid work when you ask them to be a reference. They have to, sit down and write sentences and paragraphs about you for a strong reference, and they might have to do that a lot. So if you're applying for independent jobs, interstate rotational schemes, you'll be giving them a lot of work. So it's important you ask someone you have a relationship with, because they may not want to do that work. You should consider their specialty, so anaesthetics, their positioning consultant level. So if they're a junior consultant, the people within the scheme reading the references know their seniority, so they might not give as much weight to a junior consultant giving you a 10 as they might to a senior consultant giving you an 8, which is always something to consider. And then the last thing is they're hawks or doves. It's that notion of you could be the best, but you're a 5 because everyone's a 5, or they could be a dove that gives everyone 10s. And again, the rotational schemes have some idea, or seem to have some idea of who is who, so they'll interpret those references accordingly. Your cover letter, so I mean, it's simple kind of formatting, editing, you don't want to get that wrong. The content of the cover letter is always a hard one. Typically, why anaesthetics, and why specifically where you want to go. That is hard. It's a centralized application to the VATC. So you put in one cover letter, one CV, and one set of references to a central point, and then they distribute it to all the rotational schemes. And then interview offers come back. So you kind of have to give a general why Victoria or why anaesthetics without honing in too much on, say, I really want to work at Monash, then everyone else who reads that is going to say, oh, no, thank you. I structured mine around the roles of the anaesthetist. So that's always good. It shows that whatever your style is, but for me, that was my way of demonstrating that I, done my homework. CV. So CV, I broke mine down again, similarly around those roles. So I talked about my clinical experience. The advice was that it should be concise and have relevant rotations. Everyone knows you did general medicine as an intern. You don't need to write it down. Research published or in progress. I had some in ICU. I didn't have any in anaesthetics, but that moves me to my next point, audits. The anaesthetists really like audits, and their department is very heavy on audits. So it's something during your critical care year or even the year before, you can express audit. There's Royal Melbourne, we have someone who directs all of the audits in the department, and they're very approachable. And most consultants are happy to have someone help them with their audits. And if you complete one, you can present it or assist with presenting it. Teaching and mentoring. Teaching and mentoring is just important. It's just things you do by the bedside or maybe even formal positions. Leadership and community engagement, committee work, volunteer work, and then academics. So I guess there's a lot of questions around postgraduate study and courses. Anaesthetics is becoming more competitive. There's no real formalized point system like the surgeons have to know where you should direct your efforts and time. I think a lot of people do a lot of the courses. So things like STAR, which is the Skills Training for Anaesthetic Residents, EMST, if you can get a place, ALS2, ALS1, ICU Basic, they're all useful, but I don't think they make you a standout these days. One of my colleagues applied to Tasmania and the feedback she got was to reapply when she completed a master's. So it is becoming more competitive. And I guess you have that kind of creep, where everyone has all those courses, then all of a sudden they don't stand out anymore. And it's hard to know what point the year's at. Once you've put in your application, you'll get offers and interviews. Offers, typically you'll get interviewed by your kind of region. Northwest interviews 40 people for 18 spots. And the interviews are conducted in person. Interviews are incredibly important for anaesthetics training. So your critical care job will be probably decided by your interview, because the top is so tight. It really comes down to the interview. And then in anaesthetics, it's no different. The interview is really make or break, and people will practice for months and months to try and get that. So you need a buddy to practice your interviews with. You need to get consultants to grill you so it makes you uncomfortable when you're answering questions. And then on the day, you have to hope you perform. Into a brief word about interstate applications. So this year, there wasn't much movement interstate. States have kind of clamped down their borders a little bit. That's probably for a whole host of reasons, but it's just becoming more competitive everywhere. So there'll be less movement as you can fill your training program within your state. There are a lot of stories about interstate places being burnt by Victorian trainees in particular, going there, completing basic trainee 1 and then moving back to Victoria and leaving them without a second year trainee. I applied broadly to most of the states as listed down the bottom. It did cause a bit of work in my references, but I think felt like it was a wise safety net. I'm happy to answer questions. So if anyone has any about those states there. The only other thing I'll say is the sidestep. So anaesthetics is competitive. There's a lot of people that want to do it, and training places haven't increased for some time. You may need a repeat application. With regards to repeat applications, Northwest say you have 2 good cracks, and then your 3rd try needs to be a really good try. And then they basically tell you to move on. There's no official limit on application attempts because you're not applying to ANZCO as such, you're applying to a rotational scheme. The other rotational sites that explicitly have limits, like Northwest has stated, but it's probably something that your first or second attempt, your best attempts. Interstate, something to keep in mind that I didn't know till recently is that interstate applications have mid-year intakes. So South Australia and Queensland both have mid-year intakes. So if you miss out, you might get your opportunity without waiting 12 months. You just got to keep your eyes open. There are a limited number of unaccredited registrar jobs in Victoria. The most well-known is PVACCS, which I believe has 9 registrars now. Eastern Health has some pain and anaesthetics registrars. And of course, there are rural sites, Horsham, Ballarat, that you will advertise on their website, so you need to look out for. And there's always the option of a repeat critical care year. So some places, Wangaratta, typically will take a 2nd critical care year. I think the Austin might have it as an exclusion criteria if you've done one before. And then the other thing to be aware of is that once you get too senior, you start to become very expensive to be a supernumerary resident in aesthetics. PGY5, you're being paid reg rates to hang out in theatre, which is great for you, but maybe the hospital doesn't like it so much. Yeah, happy to take emails.
Thank you, Adam. That was really informative. It's really good to know that to get into, I guess, the anaesthetic program, you take multiple pathways to get there prior to getting onto the program. And that are some very good tips regarding the CB and interview and references. So thank you very much for that. In the interest of time, we'll move on to our next speaker. Do we have Dr. Tim Macaron line?
Hello.
Hello. Hi, Tim. How are you going?
Good.
Good. Well, I'll let you introduce yourself, but Tim is a anaesthetist at the Austin Health who has a very keen interest in cardiology and anaesthesia. So I'll let you take it away, Tim. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm one of the staff anaesthetists at the Austin. My main special interest is cardiac anaesthesia. I ended up doing a fellowship in Toronto to further subspecialize in that. And I'm also echo trained. Let me share my screen. So I was asked to talk to you a bit about a day in the life of an anaesthetist. So what's kind of a standard day? Luckily, there is no really usual day. It all depends on whether I've got a trainee, how senior the trainee is, what kind of case we're doing. So it's all very exciting because things are different every day. One of the worst parts about being an anaesthetist is the early start time. Like, it's not as bad as a surgeon, but often we have to be in work between 6:45 and 8 o'clock, again, depending on the case and who's around. So I think that's one of the reasons why anaesthetists really love coffee. So I'll just give a few examples of some days. We do a little bit of outpatient clinics, usually preoperative or pain clinics, and they're more like a physician type day. You can rock up to work at 9. You have a lot of time to assess your patients, look at investigations, order investigations, and we work with a team of nurses who really put everything together. So the days feel pretty relaxed and low effort compared to days in theatre. We also do pain rounds. So as part of the acute pain service, again, this is more like a traditional physician type thing where you'll spend the morning rounding on patients, and then perhaps in the afternoon, you'll get to do some blocks to manage some of the patients that were difficult to manage on your round. And a really nice part of it is that you are a consulting service. So you can look after the patient's pain, but they have a home team that will manage all other aspects of their care. Then the really most common part of being an anaesthetist is doing standard anesthesia, which includes, general surgery, urology, neurosurgery, endoscopy. And while there are little differences about all these various types of surgery and lists, they can all be managed with fairly standard anesthesia techniques. Anyway, the next area is thoracic anesthesia. This gets a little bit more interesting and a little bit more specialized. There's placement of arterial lines, use of double lumen tubes to lung isolate, the use of bronchoscopy to confirm the tube position and confirm appropriate lung isolation. There's also sometimes the opportunity to do advanced regional techniques such as thoracic epidurals, paravertebral blocks, and erector spinae blocks. So these lists are kind of pretty coveted. Most anaesthetists in public will get like one list a month sort of thing because there's a lot to do and it's very exciting and interesting. The other type of lists that are quite exciting and interesting are ENT and airway surgery. So they allow us to use advanced techniques such as fiber optic intubation, the use of fancy jet ventilation devices to facilitate airway surgery. So this thing with the green net on the end is called a Hunsucker tube, allows you to jet ventilate a patient through a fairly narrow bore tube and gives the surgeons good access to the airway. This on the right here is a laser tube which has two cuffs in case one gets damaged by the laser, and allows the ENT surgeons to laser away things like papilloma or tumor. The other group of surgeries is things like orthopedics and vascular surgery. While not all of the cases lend themselves to regional techniques, many do, and ultrasound guided regional blocks are a really big part of these two specialties. This is an example of a sciatic nerve block. So the nerve has split into the tibial nerve and the common peroneal nerve, and local anesthetics being infiltrated around that, and that will give almost complete anesthesia of a foot or ankle. This is kind of like one of my favorite photos. So because I'm a cardiac anaesthetist, this photo kind of demonstrates what cardiac anesthesia has to offer. So there's lots of gadgets. So we have a depth of anesthesia monitor. We've got cerebral oximetry just below that. Over the right, we've got a Swan-Ganz catheter in, and it uses a continuous thermodilution technique to measure the cardiac output. And it's also got a diode in it to measure the mixed venous saturation continuously. Patient's got an arterial line in, they've got a pulmonary artery catheter in, they've got a central line in, and we're ventilating them. The other thing cardiac anesthesia has, which makes it very interesting, is the use of transesophageal echo. So the vast majority of cases we do in cardiac anesthesia, we do transesophageal echo, which allows us to manage the patient's hemodynamics very closely, as well as helps the surgeons make a diagnosis on what surgery they're likely to perform, and then also helps us look at how well the surgery was done. For example, if a surgeon does a mitral valve repair, they want to make sure that the patient doesn't have mitral stenosis after the repair and the repair is functioning correctly. This is just an interesting picture. We don't see it that often, but it is an absence of a left main coronary artery. So the LAD and the circumflex are coming off the aorta separately. In addition to my clinical work, I also get to do quite a bit of teaching. I'm the co-lead of simulation at the Austin Anaesthesia Department. So we get to do a lot of hands-on teaching of the trainees, and they really appreciate it. It brings a bit of fidelity to their learning and lets them practice lots of different things. I've almost finished my Masters of Biostatistics. So I'm almost a fully fledged statistician. You'll find a lot of anaesthetists have little side things. Some people have a Masters of Bioethics or a Masters of Biostatistics. PhDs are very common. So we get non-clinical time, about 5 to 10 hours a week, to focus on our portfolios that aren't directly clinical care. And finally, most anaesthetists do a bit of private practice. So even being a full-time anaesthetist, that's 4 days a week plus call. So there's a 5th day to do private practice during. So I think I've stuck to time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tim. That was really interesting. It's really good to see that there's a lot of variety in anaesthetics, from specialties to non-clinical work, you know, APS staff, pre-admission clinics. So thank you. We'll have questions at the end of our third speaker. So without further ado, I'll introduce our third speaker. Dr. Tzu Yen is an anaesthetist at Northern Health. He's a 3rd-year consultant interested specifically in obstetrics and pediatric anesthesia. Has worked in Sweden and Zambia as well. Did his internship in a Michelin star restaurant and is a very avid cook. So take it away, Dr. Tzu Yen Wang. Thank you.
Thank you. Just looking for the share screen button. It's like disappeared.
We will make you co-host just in a second.
It should be just down the bottom. Do you see the bottom panel of buttons?
There. Yeah. It should just be on the bottom. Here we go. I see it now.
Yeah.
Working?
We don't see anything yet.
Okay, let me have another look. What about now?
Yep, that works.
Perfect. So I am going to talk a bit about some of the subspecialty interests that I have and also what I do during the day. I work as a full-time anaesthetist at the Northern Hospital, that's up in Epping. So that comprises of the main hospital, the Northern Hospital, and also Broadmeadows. It's soon to expand to a 3rd hospital in Craigieburn. So like Tim said, by the way, Tim, hello. It's been a long time since I've seen you. I work 4 days a week, and that's 40 hours. And the majority of the work for me is in theatre with a bit of pain clinic, pre-admission clinic, like Tim said, and a little bit of off-the-floor anaesthesia, whether it be helping some airway cases in ED or ICU, or some imaging. I do about 2 on-calls per month, where usually I stay in hospital till at least 1 to 2 a.m. And that's fairly standard for a full-time anaesthetist. I have some special interest in pediatric anesthesia. So I did a year of fellowship in Sweden, where I worked in the anesthetic department there and their intensive care. There's actually no official requirement to be a pediatric anaesthetist. I guess the term doesn't really exist officially. So with standard training, anaesthetists should be comfortable giving care to children above 2 years of age. And there's kind of this informal way of calling pediatric anaesthetists where they're comfortable less than 2 years of age. And certainly if you wanted to work at the Royal Children's Hospital or the Monash Kids, it's almost certain that you need to have a pediatric anesthesia fellowship in your training. I also do have some interest in obstetric anesthesia, where I did 6 months at the Mercy Hospital for Women. Again, there is no official requirement to do, there's no official sort of training to become an obstetric anaesthetist, because that term also doesn't exist. It is standard, part of standard training, except I think with fellowship time, you could probably secure a job at the Mercy Hospital for Women. That's the one next to the Austin, the Royal Women's Hospital, and I assume Monash, which I have quite little knowledge of over there. And also importantly, it may help you secure some private work in obstetric anesthesia, which I personally don't do. I also have some interest in global health. I spent 6 months in Zambia working with a UK organisation, where we help train the local physician trainees and also the non-physician anaesthetic providers over there. We're currently doing a Masters of Global Health through the University of Sydney, And the Northern Department has pretty close links with Mongolia and also a number of Indo-Pacific centers. My teaching role currently involves upgrading the Melbourne University content to online. And so currently I'm involved with some of the online content design with the uni. Hopefully it's going to start become online next year. So why anesthesia, which is actually primarily the reason why I think I was giving the talk. It's got good vibes. I like other anesthetists, and I guess this is probably the most important factor for me. You have to like the people that you work with, and I guess it's safe to say that there's a whole lot of different anesthetists with different personalities, but that sort of fit in the group, it is quite important. And if you don't like the people that you work with, it's very unlikely you're going to enjoy your, I guess, your time there, either whether as a student or an intern or a registrar. So keep that in mind. It has very minimal ward and clinic work, which is probably the main reason why I chose anaesthetics, because I thoroughly do not enjoy ward work and clinic work. It is fast paced. We get results very quickly, and it's one-to-one care. And I find that extremely rewarding. There's enough excitement for me, even though I don't do cardiac anesthesia like Tim. I don't have any problems with the boring list. I do enjoy the 90% calm, and the rest of the 10% where my heart rate goes up. That's okay for me. I do enjoy that the work is very compartmentalized. I almost never take work home. And I think as a junior doctor, I found that very much the opposite when I was on the ward on a physician's, I guess, a ward round. The next point here, I don't have any sort of evidence for, but I believe there's a relatively high amount of public work compared to other specialties, because I guess by nature, we are a very large department. I think at the Northern, we are the largest department of consultants in the hospital. And I guess that's because we provide service to every surgical specialty and also other, I guess, off the floor work as well. And I believe the skills are quite transferable to different environments. So if you wanted to do field work, such as work with MSF, anesthesia would be a highly sought after skill. There are some other subspecialty interests that are either official or unofficial. So pain medicine and perioperative medicine are, I guess, kind of official subspecialties within the college, although you can enter both via different routes. Perioperative medicine is still very new. I don't think it's fully online yet from the College of Anaesthetists. Tim spoke about cardiac anesthesia. There's also transplant you can get involved in. Tim spoke about regional anesthesia and airway. And there's also hyperbaric medicine, which can be quite interesting. And I think one of the Austin anaesthetists is currently will move to Cairns to work in hyperbaric medicine. And Tim spoke about simulation. So I guess that gives you a pretty good overview of just, I guess, not just anesthesia itself, but also the subspecialty interests that you can focus on. But most importantly, anesthesia is good. Get on it. It sounds hard, and I think it's definitely getting harder, but it is very rewarding, and I haven't regretted the choice. So thank you.
Thank you, Suyan. Thank you for sharing some of your special interests in obstetrics and pediatric anesthesia, as well as in global health. So there's a lot of opportunities going into anesthesia. I think we'll move on to question time now and open to the floor. So I'll hand over to Matt to help facilitate that one.
Once again, thanks to our speakers. You've both been fantastic. Also, all three of you have been fantastic, and we really appreciate all the work that you've put in. There was a mention about additional training, following graduation from medical school. Someone's asked what the types of masters and postgraduate training would be recommended. So I was wondering if someone would be happy to go into a little bit more detail about that and whether they think one course is more valuable than another. If there's anything specific to elaborate on.
I can answer a little bit. In terms of choosing a master's or postgrad training, my recommendation would be to do something you're interested in. So it's not a chore because you're already busy enough being a ward doctor or whatever else you're doing. And a lot of people will do like a master's of peri-op med or a master's of pain or something like that. Anesthesia training teaches you those skills. When I look at references, I've only done it once before, having something interesting like a master's of bioethics or computer science or something like that, that would bring a real skill set to a department, would really make someone stand out from the pack, in my opinion. But I'm not a selector anymore.
I can just add quickly to that. The ones people do, so there's the Masters of Peri-Op, which is through Monash. There's a Masters of Traumatology through Newcastle, which is online. And then the most common one is probably the Masters of Critical Care through University of Sydney. None of them are useful, as Tim has just outlined. They don't make you any better at anaesthetics, and you'll learn anything that's relevant anyway. In particular, the Masters of Critical Care is written around the emergency syllabus. It's not actually written around anaesthetics at all, but it's very common, especially in New South Wales.
Okay. An additional question. How are there any, does everyone know the pathway for getting involved in pain medicine? And is it exclusively for anaesthetists who can become pain physicians, or can other specialties also do fellowships?
I could probably answer that a bit. So you don't have to be an anaesthetist to do the what's the official word? I think it's the pain. Yeah, the FFP, the pain fellowship, essentially. But it's a 2-year training program, and there are I guess physicians, GPs, rehab physicians coming through that program, and it's maybe only the last 3 to 5 years that they've become a standalone program. So you do not need to be an anaesthetist.
And what's the merit of doing that alongside standard anaesthetics training?
I think certainly when I was a registrar, pain physicians, or as in pain specialists, were not very common. It certainly would increase your employability in a hospital. I'm not sure about currently whether that would help, but as with many of these, I guess extra bits that we do, most anaesthetists can do, and will learn about pain. Well, in fact, we all do, and I think it just gives you that little extra employability, which I couldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't be able to exactly say how much more useful it is currently.
Okay. And there's one more question. How easy or difficult is it to take time out of the anaesthetics training program? And is there a particular timing that you have to keep in mind in relation to your primary and secondary exams?
I'll just quickly answer the pain thing. So pain medicine is a very lucrative specialty with no out of hours component. So people who generally do pain do their private practice in pain and do a little bit of public pain, but they have their own rooms, they consult patients, they do pain procedures, and their waiting lists are full, and it's a very sort of lucrative specialty outside of getting a public anaesthesia appointment. So it's becoming more and more competitive to get a pain training position after you finish your anaesthesia training.
I can give a quick answer to what was asked about the training timing. My understanding is that it really depends on your rotational scheme. So it'll vary. So St. Vincent's may see something different to Northwest. My understanding is in Northwest, but training is broken up into basic training, which is 2 years, and advanced training. You can't progress to basic training to advanced training without passing your primary. which is typically set in the first or second year. With regards to taking time out, they sent us an email that said you can go into extended training if you fail your primary, and they'll basically support you for 1 year, and then you're kind of out in the cold and off the rotational scheme, which would mean you then have to try and find your own advanced trainee positions as an advanced trainee. So ANZCA doesn't really care, but your training scheme wants to get people through. They will let you defer they sent us an email that basically said the reasons to defer are basically having a kid, pursuing anaesthetic related academic interests. So if you did a master's for 12 months full time, and then other. So others, they're kind of inferring that others are a bit of a weak reason.
Yeah, I think it's much easier to take time off before you embark on the path and around your fellowship time, where you're sort of out of the loop.
Okay. Thank you. So there's a couple more questions. There's one question about the nature of references in anaesthetics, whether they're a score or whether they're a written reference. There's someone who was hoping to clarify that.
Yeah, happy to give that. I'm sure Adam would probably answer the same, but the references, yes, they do have numbers which are very easy to tick, but the key is having the blank box written in with valuable information. So everyone can get 5 out of 5 or 10 out of 10, but what makes a reference strong is the text that the consultant writes in, and they often have to be, fairly specific. So I guess one of the advice I give is for residents to maybe jot down maybe times that they've had interactions with a consultant where they believe they're shined or they've done something quite positive, and then when they come to find the consultant to write a reference, they can give them that sort of a record and say, can you write these things in my reference? And I think that makes it a lot stronger than a pure sort of 10 out of 10 with nothing else.
Okay. I think we probably have time for one final question. Some of our medical students would like to know how they can go about preparing themselves for the training ahead. Are there any particular steps that our people that are moving from medical school or towards the end of medical school should be taking to get themselves a leg up?
I think one thing is to do a rotation in an anaesthesia department. So we often remember the fourth years or final years that have been on a rotation with us. You get your face around, people kind of know you because you're there for 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. And then it might be worthwhile to get onto maybe a research project or an audit with someone you click with in the department. Again, you're around, shows you're keen, and then do all the other things you need to get a crit care job.
Okay. Right. Well, I think that's largely it for tonight. Thank you everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate all your enthusiasm throughout the year and getting around our events. Most importantly, thank you to our speakers. You've all been invaluable in sharing your wisdom, your experiences, and your expertise. We hope to hopefully engage with you in future at PVACCS. And we hope you guys have an enjoyable remainder of the year. Would anyone else like to say any final words?
Yeah, just to echo what Matt has said, thank you to all of our wonderful speakers tonight, and thank you all for joining us for our final event for the PVACCS calendar. This year we've run a few educational webinars, we've done some face-to-face workshops, and we've obviously finished up with the careers night. I hope you guys stick around for next year because we've got some more exciting workshops and events planned. So thank you everyone. I hope you got something out of the careers night tonight, and as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to send them through to the PVACCS Facebook page, Instagram page, or on our website there's some links. So Rachel and I and the PVACCS team would like to say have a wonderful rest of your year and good luck with medical students doing exams and everyone else cracking on with the rest of their rotations for the year.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.